Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima. Welcome back to Blue Boards. This time we're going to be checking out Dark Souls the card game. I don't know who made it. Frankly, I'm not sure I care. I have the board game as well, and I was planning on starting with that, but the person I borrowed both these games from actually left some of the parts out of the box and had them in a completely different box. So, yeah, we're starting with the card game. Now, I'm a big fan of Souls. I'm not afraid to admit it. I've played through pretty much every game in the series twice, except for Sekiro, which I've never managed to actually finish, because that game is way harder than the other games. And hearing that there was a card game adaptation and a board game adaptation, I thought to myself, great, let's give those a shot. And since I found out I have a friend who owns both of them, sweet, I'll just ask to borrow them. You know what my biggest problem with this is? It isn't Souls. There's a lot in this game that just doesn't feel like Souls, because Souls has always been a series about personal growth and learning encounters, learning the world, learning how everything works, and then using your skills to get through and stay alive. And this game just kind of spits in the face of that at pretty much every opportunity it gets. So with that said, let me explain to you how this works. Over here on the left, you've got the encounter board, and you follow from the bonfire to any one of the encounters that are touching it, and you can reveal it to reveal what you have to do with it. I apologize for the bad focus job that's going to happen here, because seriously, the camera focus is really playing up today. And you can see here that one player will fight one monster and get one treasure, two will fight two and get one treasure, etc, etc, etc. And you do this by drawing cards from the monster decks, which are right here off camera. There's a level 1 and level 2 and level 3. And you draw these monsters, you put them down on the board here, and using the abilities of your characters, whether it be the equipment in their deck, their special abilities are listed on their card, and their ability to move around the board and attack enemies in their particular column, using these abilities, you will attack and defeat the monsters. If you manage to defeat the monsters, great. You earn yourself treasure from the treasure check up there in the top right, and you also earn souls for killing the enemies. And these souls can be used over here to purchase the stamina cards, which can improve your lot in life. And of course, it means that the encounter is finished. You may then choose whether or not you want to return to the bonfire to heal up or to continue on to another encounter. If you go back to the bonfire though, the bonfire will tick down. Okay, problem number one that doesn't make this game feel like a Souls game, you're on a time limit. You start with the blazing bonfire, which is easy enough to understand. Yep, focus just ain't working for me today. So every time you go back to the bonfire, it will slowly tick away, giving you more resources and letting you make your deck bigger, therefore having more health. But if you go there 5 times and flip over the final card, the game is over and you've lost. So you need to get to the 2 bosses and defeat them both. Thankfully, you don't have to defeat them both in one run. That would be silly. Once you defeat one, it's gone for good, but the encounters come back every time you return to the bonfire to get your decks refreshed. Beat both of them, you win. Don't pull it off, you lose. Easy enough. Again, it doesn't feel much like Souls just because you've got a bloody time limit of all things. But there are some other things that are kind of wrong with it as well. Because the encounter design I actually really like, because you get these random decks up the top here, right? And at the beginning of the game, you draw them all out to those slots, and when you get to them, you flip them, and they can be something completely different every time, and so it keeps the game a bit varied. But they really missed a trick here. Why do they make it so that you take these cards when you've beat them and discard them back to the enemy decks, when instead you could do this? Just pop them underneath the encounter here so that you can have the same encounter when you come back. It would be the Souls theorem in practice. You know what you have to do to get through there. You know whether or not your setup will work particularly well. A good mechanic let down by one particular thing that isn't particularly Souls-like, for one thing. But yeah, that's just a couple of problems that I have with it. Let's talk about the enemies. So the enemies are also drawn at random from the enemy deck. There's a lot of them, and this is just the level 1 deck. And they have their own stats and abilities to them. I apologize for the bad focus, but you can see everything that's important there. So you've got defense, which is subtracted from the attack, and then the health. So if you manage to deal 2 damage to this guy, he just dies. He'll also do 3 damage to you. He starts out in the bottom middle section of his board, and he attacks the top middle section of your board, but he will either attack the row if there's no one there, or attack the entire grid if there's no one there, and he'll look for one with the highest, I can't remember what they call it, but it's basically a taunt number. And for the knight, you've got 10, but for the herald, you've got 4, so it goes like that. You've also got an icon down there that lets you ignore defense entirely if you use that particular kind of attack. So you just do 1 damage with that kind of attack, and you're basically done for the most part. And there are plenty with their own unique abilities, like the Ethereal Slave Assassin, who has invisibility, so it can't be attacked while there are other ones on the board. Or the Silver Knight Spearman, who has the column attack ability here, so he just hits that entire column instead of just hitting one in particular. They go out on the board. There's a few things you can do, but let's just get to how the actual decks work before we get into that. So let's take the Herald, for example. The Herald has a special ability. Can I focus on this? Please let me focus on this. No, there will be no focusing on this. Thanks, phone. Never mind. There we go. So, flip the card over to heal yourself for another card 3. You start out being able to use it, but once you've used it, you've got to go to the bonfire before you can use it again. And the starter deck of the Herald goes as follows. So I know you can't see under the cards here, but they're all spears, so take my words for it. So you've got an ability that lets you keep the card if you use it, but it costs 3 stamina. You've got a yellow, a red, and a wild. But if you put this card down and willingly get rid of it, you can also deal that damage for just 1 stamina. Or if you use 4 stamina of those particular kinds, 2 wild, 1 yellow, 1 red, you'll get 3 attack off instead. Those are your basic starting attacks. But you also have armor, which lets you block damage depending on what stamina you use. You've also got shields, and in this case this one can also do damage by discarding it and using a mana. And you've also got talismans, which allow you to heal by dropping it down and using a stamina, or just using it for some slight blocking. And then the rest of the deck is stamina. And the stamina is, of course, 1-use cards that you discard in order to basically just use the weaponry. And it depends on the deck, but most of the cards in any one particular deck are probably going to be one color. So this one is mainly red, but there's a little bit of yellow and a little bit of purple in there, so no blues. You will draw a hand of 6 to begin any particular encounter, and it's entirely possible to brick. Imagine if you get 3 shields and then 2 yellow and 1 blue mana. You're not going to be able to do anything with them, right? That sucks. You get the opportunity to put the hand back into your deck and then redraw it, but if you brick again, there's nothing you can do about it. So you might end up in a position where you simply can't attack the enemies at all. It's just a luck-based thing, which again feels weird in a Souls game because you always feel like you're going in with a certain set of equipment and a plan in mind. I'd like it better if you could just decide what cards you had in your hand at the beginning of the game. Or I should say at the beginning of any encounter, which would make more sense. So there are 5 actions you can do during any player turn, and any of the players can do any of the actions in any order, but they're only allowed to do each once, and most of them make perfect sense. You've got moving 1 space up, down, left or right, no diagonals, and you can't move through people, so it's a little bit of a game of positioning. You can use 1 attack ability, 1 ability that isn't an attack ability off your equipment. You can use your heroic ability by flipping your card over, and you can discard and draw, which honestly I don't understand, and if I'm being completely honest, I kinda hate it, because it implies that you need to get rid of cards in your hand that you don't like, but since you're discarding them, you're actively hurting yourself to trying to get to your other cards faster. And doing that just sits wrong with me, because it just doesn't feel like something you would do in Souls, especially when you don't want to do it in this anyway, because if enemies lash out and attack you, which they do after you've done all your actions, they tend to go first. All of them move like from left to right, top to bottom in the enemy grid. And when they're all done activating, everyone draws up to their hand of 6, and if anyone can't draw up to the hand of 6, you're all dead, you all go back to the bonfire. Easy peasy. But you want to save the cards in your hand and on your deck for being hit by attacks. So manually discarding and drawing is just weird. It doesn't make any sense to me when your deck is your life. And even then, you could end up discarding something that you end up needing from whatever you've drawn and not realize it until after you've drawn. And it's just another one of those luck-based things that drives me absolutely insane in this game. But there's also the problem of the way the game hands out souls and treasures. So you get souls and treasures for taking out enemies, right? You'll take them out by hitting them with attacks, and once you've done that, you get souls. And souls will go into a separate loot pile. So let's just say I take 2 of the souls tokens and put them here. They are now in their own loot pile. And then, after another encounter, they will move over to the inventory, where you can use them. This also applies for treasures. So a treasure starts in the loot pile here, and then moves to the inventory after the next encounter, or whether you go to the bonfire. But if there's anything in the loot pile, you lose it if everybody has to go back to the bonfire because one character dies. Yes, that is equipment, and that is also souls, which doesn't make any sense. But again, if they're in the inventory, you don't lose them, whether it be souls or inventory. So it's just another reason why the game breaks the laws of the way the actual game works, of how souls works. So again, it just doesn't feel like souls. But then, you've got treasures. Treasures end up being a real problem. Because you got a stack of 40 treasures here, and you have to shuffle and draw them. And sometimes, let's just say we're playing the Herald, for example. Sometimes they'll turn out well, like the Spider Shield. The Spider Shield is infinitely useful to him because it's got red and yellow, which is the colors that he focuses on. But what if you get something that requires a lot of yellow and a lot of blue, like the Oni Slayer Great Bow? That's more appropriate for the knight, but you just don't get that in your starter deck. So you'll have to spend a lot of the souls that you've earned in order to actually add that to your deck and have it be useful. And then it'll be something that's just completely useless to you in all situations. Like, for example, if you get the Chloranthy Ring, it requires blues, and the Herald has no blues in his deck. This might not be a problem for 3 players, where they can share treasure, but if you're playing solo and you get the Chloranthy Ring as your treasure for that one encounter, you basically get nothing out of it, unless you go to the effort of spending your hard-earned souls in order to get stamina cards over there. 2 for ones that can count as one or the other, and 5 for ones that count as 2 at once. Unless you go to the effort of changing your deck up in order to actually use those particular items, you've basically got no use for that treasure. That means playing true solo is really tough. Like, almost unfairly tough. You just need to rely on luck in so many ways. Not to brick when you start drawing all your cards. Not to lose any particular attacks when you're going through a boss fight. Like, let's say, for example, Vort of the Boreal Valley. He needs to take 5 damage, right? But then you flip him over, and he needs to take 5 more damage. So he needs to take 10 damage total, right? Your 3 spears add up to 9 damage, and then your 2 shields add up to 13 damage. When you go to fight someone like Vord, if you haven't managed to get any useful equipment, you're basically screwed. Because if you end up taking damage and end up discarding even 1 or even 2 attacks, that's it, you're done. You literally can't damage the boss enough in order to actually beat him. So it can end up coming down to just flat out luck, whether or not you can win in true solo. And it's not like the balancing is broken for just true solo. Sometimes it can be broken for other ones as well. Like, for example, there are some encounter cards in the game which will be like, hey, fight 2 monsters at 2 players, fight 5 monsters at 3 players, or something ridiculous like that where the numbers just feel off. And sometimes you'll just end up screwed because you'll need to go through like one of these encounters in order to get to the boss fight. It's not even like Souls where you can run past all of the enemies that you've encountered and just get to the boss without taking any damage. No, the game makes you fight them. You might just get unlucky and you'll just lose and there'll be nothing you can do about it. And that's not very Souls-like. People can beat Souls at level 1 with really bad weapons just through pure skill alone. And this game feeling like it can cripple you just because the cards didn't come out your way. And even then, there are some things that just don't make any sense to me when it comes to this design. Like, why can't I trade in treasures that are worthless to me as souls? Let me trade them in for souls so at least I can make my deck slightly better. Why can't I buy anything from a merchant? Take like 5 cards from the top of the treasure deck and put them out as like a market every time you go back to the bonfire and then let me spend souls on that instead. Why can't I dodge? I can understand not being able to block, but dodging is also something that is very specific to equipment. And the Knight and the Herald, just as an example, can't dodge at all with their starter deck, which again, just doesn't make thematic sense when it comes to Dark Souls as a game. So you find yourself thinking, why can't I like spend 1 stamina to dodge and then have to spend like 2 stamina to dodge again and then have to spend like 3 stamina in order to dodge for a 3rd time? Something like that. It would make more sense. It would make sense draining the cards out of your hand slowly in order to avoid damage to, again, just represent stamina. Also, the bosses. So you know how in Souls, bosses have elemental weaknesses and you can exploit that by bringing along certain kinds of resin or certain weapons in general? Not these bosses. Starts out green, but you go to the next behavior card and it goes orange. Go to the next behavior card, it goes purple. Go to the next behavior card, it turns into a spell. So again, it just ends up being pure luck, whether or not you can really do much damage to these bosses, and it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like Souls. And that's the reason why I don't like it. It just doesn't feel like Souls. I really appreciate this mechanic of having the encounters turn out differently every time, but even then, like not being able to like stick cards underneath the encounters in order to be like, hey, this is what this encounter was before, here it is again. Do you want to avoid it, or do you want to go through it again in order to make your time a little bit easier? I don't like the idea that you can get really unlucky and just brick by drawing some really bad hands and have to spend some time actively taking damage in order to actually attack. Again, that doesn't make any sense. That's not Souls. You can't dodge. That's not Souls. There's no way to get treasure that's guaranteed good for you. That doesn't feel like Souls. There's no way to like turn equipment into Souls. That doesn't feel like Souls. You're on a time limit. That doesn't feel like Souls. It feels like something completely different. Like a completely different game. And I just don't like it. I don't like the way that it works. I don't like the way that your randomness can determine how well you do at the beginning. And remember, if only one party member dies, you all get sent back to the bonfire and you lose everything. Which again, is not a Souls thing. But it's also just, yeah, if someone just really bricks on their initial hands and they end up losing like 12 cards, you basically have to go back to the bonfire and cash in what you earned. So it ends up being luck. And it ends up being luck what treasures you get. It ends up being luck what enemies you get. You might just end up getting a really bad set of enemies for your party composition, and it just doesn't work. You can't play true solo. It just doesn't work. You have to rely a lot on luck in order to actually survive through that. And again, it's not Souls. It just doesn't feel like Souls. There's some neat ideas here. You can turn this stamina system into something pretty cool. You can turn this encounter board system into something pretty cool. This time limit will work in a game that isn't really Souls, but it is Souls. It's trying to be Souls. It's trying to look like Souls, but it's not Souls. So yeah, that's it. This has been Blue Maxima. Andy's dog Bruce. I'll see you all next time.